During the Second World War, the German army was known for its incredible use of tanks and mechanised vehicles which caused chaos across Europe. The German Blitzkrieg would sweep quickly across Europe during the early days of the Second World War in an attempt to take as much land as possible quickly for the Nazis. The Nazis would occupy different countries such as France and Poland for a number of years until the Soviets and the Allies would liberate these areas as Hitler's influence across Europe dwindled with his army on the back foot. Vehicles such as the Panzer II would career across the open landscape of Europe. However, no matter how quick the Germans wanted their vehicles, they also had to build other types of vehicles too. One of these was the Springer, or the SD-KFZ 304. This was in a sense a huge mobile bomb on a tank. So join us today as we look at the Springer, Hitler's tank bomb, and remember to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. The Springer in a sense was a bomb on a tracked vehicle. That vehicle in particular was the Kettenkrad. This was a half-track motorcycle that had a single front wheel. Today Kettenkrads are incredibly collectible and they saw much service on the Eastern Front. They were used to carry heavy loads, carry soldiers through the horrendous conditions on the Eastern Front, and were even used at times as tugs for aircraft. The Kettenkrad was in a sense an incredibly versatile vehicle available at the Germans' disposal, and there were a great number made. But the Springer would be based on the Kettenkrad, but would be used for a much more sinister purpose. It was planned to be a demolition vehicle, meaning it was practically a huge bomb on tracks. The Germans did use vehicles for this purpose, for example the Goliath, the rather small remote-controlled bomb that the Allies called the Doodlebug. The Springer was different though. The Goliath for one was just radio controlled, but the Springer was practically a motorbike on tracks as well. The Kettenkrad controls were used by a driver who would drive the tank close to a target intended to be brought down. So the driver would take the Springer as close as they could using the manual controls and the controls of the vehicle before he would then disembark. After this, the final approach to the target was controlled by a wire or even sometimes wireless remote control. So after the driver parked up the Springer towards its final target, it was guided by a control. This was to ensure that the driver would not perish when the Germans' enemies would fire at it and try to disable it, as the armour around the tank was not incredibly thick, being around 10mm at its maximum all the way around. After the driver had control of the vehicle using their device, they would then go and park it next to a building or a bunker or a high value target. The intention of the Springer was that it would carry a huge 330kg high explosive bomb, and then once parked up, the operator would simply detonate it, blowing the vehicle to pieces and also subsequently bringing down the building as well. It was a weapon that was intended to create carnage and chaos in urban warfare situations. Imagine for example if this would have been used at Stalingrad. Operators could easily park it next to a target before detonating it and levelling part of the city to the ground. In terms of what it looked like, it featured 6 staggered non-powered road wheels on each side, and at the front was a large drivetrain. The Springer was powered by an Opel Olympic engine found at the front of the chassis, and the driver position was in the rear of the vehicle. The Springer was far too big to be delivered to the battle by truck, so for transport it sometimes would be forced to be taken by train. It had a collapsible rear shield to allow the driver to be protected slightly from gunfire. It was not the tallest vehicle, standing at over 1.2 metres tall, and when standing next to it, it almost looks like a carriage that would be towed. It weighs around 1500 kilograms, and the engine gave out a total horsepower of 36, so it wasn't the quickest or most powerful vehicle either. But that wasn't the point of the Springer. It was never designed to be the quickest and sleekest vehicle on the field of combat. It was planned to be a vehicle that simply was planned to be blown up, to destroy targets and buildings, and to clear a path for the Wehrmacht. It would have been an offensive weapon, and only had a crew of 1, being the driver. Of course it was only a one-use weapon, as once the bomb had been detonated, the whole Springer would be blown to pieces, having caused much damage and devastation. Only 50 vehicles were produced, and we still don't know if any were used in combat, or whether they were just designed and made, as they were produced around 1944 to 1945, when the Germans were pretty much on the full retreat during the latter stages of the war. The Springer was the in-between demolition vehicle of the Wehrmacht and the German army, with the Goliath being the miniature vehicle, but there was one tank which was even bigger. The Borgward 4 was an even bigger remote-controlled vehicle that was used for demolition by the Germans. It would carry a 450 kg explosive charge, and it was different from the other tanks. The Borgward had the capacity to release its explosive before it detonated. There were many different variants of the Borgward, but there were 1,181 produced. Compared with the Goliath, this is still a small amount, as the Goliath had 7,564 of them made. The Borgward was unreliable and also expensive, as it did have the capacity to drop its bomb. It could be used more than once, so in a sense it was a bomb carrier. So the Springer was a strange tank bomb that interestingly is one of the most unique tanks of the German army. Making use of the reliable Kettenkrad vehicle and tweaking it to improve its mobility was smart, as was the use of placing a huge bomb on the back of it. With this, it would wreak havoc with an enemy, if it was ever used, that is. Today, one of only a few Springer tanks can be found at the Tank Museum in Bovington, and when you stand next to it, you can't help but consider how such a small vehicle could cause such a huge amount of damage to a city or a town. Once again, thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.